Hello and welcome everyone to the Asia Society Policy Institute's webinar on the Ballot and Beyond South Asia in 2024. I'm Farwa Aamer. I'm the Director of South Asia Initiatives at the Institute here in New York. South Asia is, of course, one of the most dynamic regions in the world, and it is headed towards a pivotal juncture as three of its major countries, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, go into elections in the first half of the coming year. 2023 has been a mixed year for the region. India concluded a successful G20 presidency with clear diplomatic wins in some areas, coupled with some challenges in others. Pakistan has had a difficult year, not only owing to the political turmoil, but also growing economic instability and heightened security risks, all while the country is still grappling with the impacts of the 2022 floods. Bangladesh, the first to go into elections next year, has had routine protests and street scuffles ahead of the general vote that led strong international reactions towards the country. To unpack all this and more, we have an excellent panel with us today. We're joined by Dr. Mohan, Senior Fellow, Asia Society Policy Institute in Delhi, Ms. Nasim Zehra, National Security Expert and Senior Journalist joining us from Pakistan, and Dr. Sreeradha Datta, Professor of International Affairs, OP Jindal Global University, and author of Bangladesh on a New Journey, Moving Beyond Regional Identity. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes for all those attending today. We have a few opening remarks from each of our panelists, followed by some questions from my end. And at about the 50-minute mark, we open the floor for the audience Q&A. So if you have any questions, please use the Zoom Q&A box to send in all your questions, and we'll try and respond to some of those later in our discussion today. So without further ado, let me just begin with an opening question for each one of you. As we stand at the brink of these elections in 2024 in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, could each of you briefly share insights into the current political landscape shaping up, as well as key issues and opportunities around the political discourse? And where do you see these countries headed depending on the election outcomes? I'm going to come to you, Dr. Mohan, first to hear your perspectives and allow you to share some things about the question in regards to India. So over to you.
Thank you, Farwa. Wonderful to be here with all of you this morning in New York, evening in South Asia. So I would say, as you said in your introduction, India has had a good year. On the economic front, the fears that COVID-19 and the Ukraine war will derail Indian economy, those fears fortunately did not materialize. And the first two quarters of this year, the 23-24, have seen more than 7% growth rate in India, which was more than expected. So in a way, the economy is chugging along, and India has become the fastest growing major economy, and that claim, which today seems more credible, and the fact that China is slowing down and India is growing faster, that I think is creating a buzz in terms of shifting supply chains, more investments, and the China plus one strategy in the West is beginning to draw India deeper into the economic flows in Asia and the world. On the foreign policy front, as you pointed out, the G20, just as Indian economy takes off and is set to become the third largest, that is around $5 trillion by the end of this decade, it's also, I think, been a somewhat of a coming out party for Indian diplomacy. The G20, this is the summit, this is the first time India is hosting it. It has been quite a success because it was not clear at all at the beginning of the year whether India can even get a joint statement from the 20 leaders, given the differences over Ukraine that were paralyzing the international system. So there was, I think, sufficient cooperation for India to push through an agreed position between the G20 countries. And then India also had some wins of its own by bringing Africa into the G20 and claiming, this is part of India's attempt to articulate the voice of the global South. Finally, I would say on the foreign policy front, the real change, I would say, has been the transformation of India-US relationship. We know that for the last 20 years, the relationship has been on the upward trajectory. But this year's visit by PM Modi to Washington on a state visit and an announcement of an expansive agenda of technological, industrial, and political security cooperation, I would say marks a decisive turn in India's relationship with the US. And over the last 4 years, we've seen the Biden administration actually devote significant attention to India and push this relationship forward. And Mr. Modi, unlike many of his predecessors, is not inhibited about engaging the US. And we've seen as a result a number of new initiatives, the most notable one being the ISET, the initiative on critical and emerging technologies. On the political side, I would say domestically, the elections are coming up, and my sense is the country has been polarized. You ask if it is going to be a contentious election. A lot of people are hoping at least there would be a serious challenge to Mr. Modi, that the opposition parties can get their act together and at least bring down Mr. Modi a few notches, if not deny him the capacity to form the next government. Because in the last elections, Mr. Modi got 303 seats for his own party, and the hope that the opposition can come together and put up a united fight to give a real one-on-one contest to in most places. But that dream, which seemed possible even 3 months ago, now after the state elections in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, in Rajasthan and Telangana, now looks more difficult because the BJP has performed very well in these elections. And now it looks like Mr. Modi will become the first Prime Minister of Nehru, after Jawaharlal Nehru, our founding Prime Minister, to win 3 successive mandates from the Indian publics. So that is really where it looks like. But then even 6 months is a long time in politics. Hopefully, if the Congress gets its act together, there could still be some contestation. But at this point, it looks there's not much of a challenge to Mr. Modi, who has really combined 3 broad factors, I would say. 1, the emphasis on delivering welfare with greater efficiency. 2, the emphasis on cultural nationalism. And finally, the building a party. Actually, South Asia, we've not had these kind of political parties. I mean, almost like a, really mass party, deeply stretching its. We've seen some of this in the communist parties earlier, but it's really one of the biggest political parties in the world, the BJP, and their level of organization right to the ground level. This has not been written much about, but this is something quite unique, I would say, in Indian political history. So I would say together these factors are driving him to a 3rd term, it looks like. So I think India's position looks good. There have been some problems. We can come back to that. But I would say on the economy, on foreign policy, on the domestic side, the stability and continuity in the policies seem to be set.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohan. Insightful as always. You definitely highlighted some key areas there, and we're going to come back to them, especially the US-China equation with India and how that's evolving. And we extensively at the Asia Society Policy Institute covered Prime Minister Modi's visit in June to Washington, D.C. And there's definitely more that's happening in that relationship. So we'll come back to you. But speaking of political parties and things and contentious elections, I would like to come to Ms. Zehra now. We're seeing sort of familiar political dynamics persisting in Pakistan, but there's a lot that's happening. And I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Farwa. Thank you, Asia Society, and look forward to an interesting discussion. As far as Pakistan is concerned, last couple of years specifically, and this year particularly, have been years where it's been an inward-looking time for Pakistan, with the kind of political problems, political upheaval on the one hand, and huge economic challenges on the other hand, and security issues, internal security issues. Pakistan has really been constrained to focus inward and on 3 issues. First, looking at the economy, I think Pakistan's achievement, if one was to call it that, Pakistan's achievement in the last couple of years was really avoiding a default. So that is the nature of the challenge and the crisis that Pakistan faced. Pakistan managed to avoid a default. Pakistan then turned towards stabilizing its economy, and then looking at the issue of engaging not only its immediate neighbors in the West, but also moving more towards the Middle East, the GCC countries. So at this point in time, the focus of both the caretaker government, as was the focus of the last government, the PDA coalition government, after the removal of Imran Khan in April 2022, the entire focus primarily has been on trying to manage the economy and trying to prevent a kind of collapse of sorts, and trying to avoid a default, which it has managed to do. And as of now, the focus is on the one hand to go in for macro discipline, get IMF to clear its second tranche, which is most likely going to happen. There is a green signal in terms of how Pakistan has opted for economic macroeconomic discipline and the programs that it's put in place. And the other important development has been really to look for foreign investment to respond to the interest that has been shown by various countries, GCC countries. China remains a key partner, but in addition to that, we now have agreements. We have the FTA signed with the GCC and free trade agreement, and it is in the process with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The bilateral investment treaty has been signed, and we are looking at possible investments. There is great interest, and stage one has been crossed in terms of MOUs being signed on in various fields, from IT to agriculture to textiles, climate change, etc. So that's as far as the economy is concerned. Pakistan remains hit. Pakistani population remains hit by inflation, and that remains a continuing problem. So on the economic front, those are the kind of issues that Pakistan's current caretaker government is engaged with. We have had under the last government, the PDM government, which is a coalition government, which included all the major parties, except PTI, of course. And the Special Investment Facilitation Center in clear partnership and concrete partnership with the army. Some would argue that the army was the one that actually initiated it. And the army's role in development and economy became very apparent and very clearly defined during Imran Khan's time, when the National Defense Council was set up, and the Prime Minister and the Army Chief were both, they led that initiative, the council. And after that, now you have the Special Investment Facilitation Council. And when it was set up, the whole idea was that countries in the region, especially GCC countries, were very clear that they wanted a one-window operation, etc. So I think it would be correct to say that Pakistan is these are stepping stones towards greater investment from the outside, something that Pakistan really needs badly. So from economy, if we were to move to issues of security, internal security, terrorism, it's been a rising threat in the last 1 year particularly, but even earlier on. The problem of terrorism, and especially linked to Pakistan-Afghan border, those issues have multiplied, and dovetailing into that, or rather linked or flowing from that, has been the issue of Pakistan's relations with Afghanistan. That remains a major challenge, something which is work in progress. The question of refugees, 3 million plus refugees, sending them back, how Pakistan has dealt with it has raised questions, but you have 400,000 refugees who've gone back, and the problems with Kabul still continue to continue to exist, and Pakistan, Afghanistan remain in a dialogue situation. In some ways, it's kind of a paradox. On the one hand, you have the Afghan Commerce Minister come in, and there are discussions in terms of how to increase trade, how to ensure connectivity, regional connectivity. Pakistan and Afghanistan and countries of Central Asia. On the other hand, you have these problems which are not only about just refugees, but Pakistan continues to raise the question of terrorism linked to Afghanistan and to Afghans, and in some cases, and we've had Pakistani officials share evidence with the Afghan government, and there is obviously it's far from a settled issue there. In addition to that, we've had in terms of the impact on economy, smuggling of dollars, smuggling of flour, smuggling of other food items into Afghanistan, and there has been a clampdown, a very, very strict clampdown, and border controls, etc., have been established. So some would argue that in the last 1 year, border controls, controlling the downslide of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar, these are some of the things that have, and ensuring macro level discipline, fiscal discipline, have been some of the positives. Terrorism remains an issue, something, and in addition to that, you have problems in Balochistan. The issues of missing persons, etc., continue. It's again work in progress, but those are the kind of problems that Pakistan is faced with. Then coming to, I think the so-called elephant in the room, it's really the elections, which are less than 60 days away, and as far as the elections are concerned, that's the big thing for Pakistan. There are big questions around the elections, but these 12th elections that are to be held on the 8th of February, they're being held against the backdrop of 4 important developments, which in some ways set the context for the elections. One is the April removal, vote of no confidence, through which Imran Khan was removed in April 2022. Then the May 9th developments in Pakistan, kind of a saga, first ever attacks on the military installations, etc., seen as a kind of an unprecedented attack where, according to the ISPR, 146 serving military personnel were involved, including a lieutenant general, 2 major generals, etc. So that, and it was these people from the army, PTI people, supposedly PTI people, and others. And so this remains a major contentious point. Many people from PTI, many of them are have been kept in prison. It's now 6 months, and the big questions around how legal or illegal this is, the question of military courts, etc. So that's major contentious points. The question of holding an independent inquiry, and the other side arguing for strict steps taken, because clearly there were issues within the army as well, and tough, obviously tough steps were taken, measures were taken as far as the people from the army were concerned. Then the third issue is linked to May 9th, was really the falling out between PTI and the then Army Chief General Bajwa. And and the fourth is the army restoring, in some ways, the army in leadership restoring its ties with the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. And I say the army restoring ties because General Bajwa, the former army chief, has been on record saying that how they were involved in instituting cases, etc., against Nawaz Sharif, and how it was unfair what had happened to Nawaz Sharif. Coming to the elections very quickly, I think the challenge here is, will the elections be fair and free? The environment in which the elections are taking place are full of uncertainty and apprehension because of, what I just mentioned, economic, political, and social challenges that have cast a shadow over the election. And when I say, social challenges as well, so there are inflation means social upheaval. Balochistan problem is an abiding problem. There are issues of ethnicity, etc. Then moving to apprehensions that same old leadership may come back. Belief in democratic transition is decreasing. People don't think elections will lead. Some people don't think elections will lead to a democratic transition because Imran Khan plus others are under arrest, making belief the time of hereditary old politics, may just come back. PTI is not getting space like other political parties in terms of campaigning for the election. So the question is whether there'll be freedom for all parties to campaign. Questions about whether the polls will be held on February 8th or not. There are several issues. Only today we've had even PMLN come out and say they are going to file cases on delimitations. There was delimitation that just concluded, and an independent FAFIN organization has said that 1/5 of the delimitations are questionable and that they weren't legal. While there is question of whether these elections will be fair or not, there is also a contra thinking about the elections, that elections could lead to some stability and representative government. That no matter what the situation is, when there is representative government, to whatever degree it is better than the situation that currently exists. And the other question, as far as PTI is concerned, with all the controls, with all the power being used to push back PTI and to break away its people and send them to other parties, you still have seen in the last 2 weeks that in KPK, PTI people have come out in big numbers whenever given opportunity. There have been conventions that have, workers' convention, where with demonstration of support has been pretty evident. We can talk about detail as far as that aspect is concerned, PTIs, because all polls indicate, most of the polls certainly indicate that PTI remains the most popular party, and that despite all the state controls, it will be able to get a sizable portion. Of course, we have to keep in mind that on the election day, there's the election machinery, etc., that comes into play. And so what extent will PTI manage that as well? But in terms of contra thinking and in terms of the elections producing something positive, Parliament will always give voice and power to the people. Hence, elections will lead to a better situation as people cast their votes. It's also important that despite whatever state repression or control there will be, political parties, if they would get representation, even if not power. The other important thing is, finally, that while pre-poll rigging in terms of manipulation, in terms of engineering, etc., shooing people from here to there, shifting parties from here to there, on the day of the elections, it's not easy to. You can't, rigging on the day of the elections is not easy. And it's interesting that at this point, as we speak, there are about 67 local observer groups that have been allowed to come and observe the elections, plus 29 just signed in today. So you'll have a huge number of groups on the day of the election. The role of the media is important. While On the one hand, the mainstream media is controlled to a great extent. Social media really is significant and important and continues to lead the information kind of charge as far as the public is concerned, as far as the potential voter is concerned. Any major changes after the elections in terms of foreign policy or economic policy? I don't see any major changes. I think it will be continuity of the same. And also in terms of global policy, I don't see that the elections in Pakistan, the result would make much of a difference.
Thank you so much, Ms. Zehra. And we'll come to that. And I really like what you said about, an inward-looking time for Pakistan. There's definitely a lot that's been unfolding, a lot that will continue to unfold, and it'll be a space to watch out for. And especially because you touched Afghanistan, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the neighborhood policies later, and I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on that as well. But since you mentioned free and fair elections, that's a hot topic for Bangladesh. And I'm going to turn over to Dr. Datta now to hear her thoughts with regards to the election space in Bangladesh. So over to you.
Thanks, Farwa. Pleasure to be here. Yes, straight to the elections. Bangladesh has announced that 7th January, so exactly a month from now or day less, it's going into the 12th Jatiya সংসদ, this parliamentary elections. From the look of it, it does not look like it's going to be a very credible election. So Sheikh Hasina is bidding for a 4th term, which is totally unprecedented, not only in Bangladesh, but elsewhere too. So it's really looks like the Awami League government is here to consolidate its already very strong grip on power. And it's, as we see, as the situation on the ground is, very evident, that the government machinery is using every power possible to suppress the opposition. There are huge amount of challenges that we see. And if you recall briefly the last 2 elections that Bangladesh had, which is 2014 and 2018, were also not credible elections. They were completely one-sided elections. If we have time for that, we'll get into that. Bangladesh has always had, in fact, since 1996, body known as neutral caretaker government, which is essentially an interim government who assists the election commission to hold free and fair elections. This was actually introduced into the constitution through a demand by Awami League, because given the divisive polity within Bangladesh, where no political party can trust the other, no opposition wants to hold elections under the particular, political party in power. So this was the acceptable negotiated situation where the caretaker government, which is headed by a retired Chief Justice and by 9 other technocrats who are consensually chosen, oversees the election. In 2011, Sheikh Hasina, through an amendment, did away with the caretaker government. Even that is actually a debatable point, because the apex court that was deciding on the judgment was very clear that at least for the next 2 terms election, the caretaker government should be there in position to kind of see it through. But of course, as we know, Awami League didn't think much about it and, just said that, no, it's kind of done away with. The way we see it now is that Awami League and of course its allies are very much there, actively participating. Now, BNP, as you would know, because they have been in the wilderness, I mean, they in 2008 December election, Sheikh Hasina came with a very strong majority. And then, of course, 2014 was one-sided, where BNP did not want to fight the elections on the same ground that elections under Awami League will not be free and fair, not be credible, so they did not, join the elections. So it was a free runway for Awami League again. 2018, the 3rd time round, BNP decided that no, it was going to join, but, a very bizarre situation unfolded, where the night before, thanks to all the cadres on the ground and whoever was responsible, the ballot box and early morning announcement took place of very strong electoral victory for Awami League. surprisingly, there was not much of mobilization on the ground, and everybody accepted that. Now, this time round, we see it's a different situation. And we have seen from October onwards that Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which is really the other second largest party that Bangladesh has, which has been in, the main opposition party for long, has been able to, bring people out on the roads. There's been huge amount of movements. There've been organizational, there've been rallies where it's been very, very strongly supported by, uh, of course, the local population. And quite clearly, of course, as I said, the state apparatus has also been very used to kind of effectively, bring that down, shut them down, really. More importantly, in the last 6 weeks or so, we've seen over 10,000 BNP leaders, activists who were arrested. Many of them on charges which were filed in 2013, 2014, and 15, and things like that. So party offices have been attacked. They've been, huge amount of repressive measures that has been used against this BNP and the opposition. I just want to add a little bit about the BNP too. The BNP, of course, as I said, has been able to, get people out on the streets. Mobilization has been very, very effective, which was surprising to many who were watching. BNP, who's led by Khalida Zia, is physically very unwell, and we haven't seen her in the public domain at all. She doesn't come out. Also, there are some corruption allegation charges, so she will not be able to, fight the election. Her son lives in London who's unable to not only join the elections, also several corruption charges are labeled against him, which makes him ineligible to fight the elections. So it's basically the other leaders who've been there for very long, and but all of them, I think every single leader worth naming has been now arrested on some charge or the other. But while there have been some very credible road rallies and movements, I have to say that BNP has constantly been flagging two issues. One, that Awami League needs, Sheikh Hasina needs to step down, and caretaker government needs to be brought in to have free and fair, credible elections. Very valid. But the point is that what about any other electoral issues? I haven't heard, and it's not that it's possible to follow every single electoral campaign, but I haven't seen them really talk about any particular issue really as an electoral campaign. Of course, I have to also add to it that they've been saying they're not going to join the elections. But what, for a political party who's been in the wilderness for over 15 years, what are you going to offer to the people? I don't think that's there. But at the same time, in Bangladesh, we've always seen there's a huge anti-incumbency. No political party through free and fair, credible elections has returned, except for the last 15 years, which again, very clearly were neither free and fair nor credible. But right now we see, Awami League, the government clearly says 7th January is the date, and 30th November was the last date for nomination, and BNP held back. So we have now Awami League and its coalition joining the electoral fray. There's also a third party known as the Jatiya Party, which was actually established by the military leader Ershad. It has two factions, one which is led by his brother, GM Kadir, the other one by his wife, Roshan. GM Kadir faction has said that they are going to join the elections, not as part of the coalition of the Awami League. They have been part of the coalition. It's a very funny thing that's always happened in the parliament with Jatiya Party. They fought, but they've been positioned as the opposition in the, the farcical elections that I'm talking about. So the parliament was completely manipulated. Now they say they're going to field candidates in all the constituencies. They have 64 districts and 300 seats, really. While the other faction has said that they're not going to join the election. So that also seems, little at this point of time uncertain. While all of this is happening, the other extremely difficult situation on the ground is that Bangladesh, as you know, as in fact, till 2 years ago, all of us were talking about this miracle growth story of Bangladesh, which despite political turbulence, despite instability, has managed to keep anything between 6 to 7% growth rate. And a large contribution to that growth rate was actually a very robust industry, which is known as a ready-made garment industry. And that in the last few months, again, we see the workers are out on the road on, demanding two major issues. One, of course, their working conditions. Uh, all these,
Yeah.
industries are doing, of course, very well because, as I said, they're the largest export earner. But at the same time, the working conditions are very poor and their wages are very low. While a government commission was institutionalized to examine the issues, and they did suggest some, some kind of redressal of the wages, but of course, the industry themselves didn't accept it. So, but again, we've seen how the government has used its machinery to repress that. So, on the ground, not only do we have BNP opposition constantly, trying to rally support. The Awami League, of course, is going out to, tell people its own growth story. But we also have the RNG people on the road again. So it's a very, very turbulent, violent situation. And after long, I see how Bangladesh, again, as you know, Bangladesh is known for its Hartal politics, which over the last few years has stabilized. We didn't see so much of it. But once again, there's been, a return to that. And also, very unfortunately, coming to this growth story that I just mentioned, Bangladesh right now, I would say the last 1 year, 1.5 years, has had a deep slide into the economy. So there's a huge strain on the economic side. And while, of course, one can talk about the global pandemic issues as well as the, the war which has led to it. And also another factor always that, works against Bangladesh is natural disasters. They either have extreme heat waves, they have heavy rains, unexpected floods, which always affect the economy, really. But that apart, what we've seen recently, and that's very, very clear, it's all out there in the public domain for anyone to see, is the financial management that's happened. It's extremely evident and clear to everybody about the kind of unethical business practices that has involved syndicates there. Whole lot of artificial shortages have been created, price fixing, extremely poor corporate governance, and again, culture of willful loan defaults, again, that could have been fixed easily. Huge, again, number of cases which have been brought out by the media about money laundering and, custom evasion and all of that has happened. And we've seen Bangladesh, which had about a year ago a huge forex reserve, even I think 2 years ago, 50 billion kinds, has now hit below 20. So that's really, and in fact, it's in the last quarter, I think the trade deficit fell to a negative nearly 18 billion. So clearly things are not working out for Bangladesh. Of course, food inflation is the highest again. And we see that, while Bangladesh, of course, we keep referring to the growth story and the amazing economic miracle that we talk about, it's quite clear that the financial infrastructure in Bangladesh is a problem. It just is not able to handle these issues that has come up, and power deficit is something which is, again, so all in all, people of Bangladesh are deeply troubled at this point of time. Not only are there street violence constantly, but the, day-to-day life in terms of food and other shortages is also becoming a problem. Coming to its other issues, we've seen in terms of how it's managed its regional relationship. Bangladesh, in fact, the book that you mentioned just now, which is going to be launched very soon, it's really about how Bangladesh has become such an important mover and shaker in the region. And every single extra regional or regional player wants to join hands with Bangladesh. And as of course, we know that India, Bangladesh are close partners, and they've launched a sub-regional growth story, which had never been seen earlier in the region. That apart, of course, we know that, China, of course, has worked very well with Bangladesh always, irrespective of which political party has been in Dhaka. China has worked very closely. So politically, economically, and also from the defense aspects, China has been one of its main support system. And of course, for this election, again, we see that China's, put its weight again with this particular government, as has Russia. Russia, again, historically has been very close with the Awami League from 1970, Mujibur's time. Even now, they've said the one strong voice, which is, constantly bringing the issues onto the ground, is the US. They have been constantly talking about how the democracy norms have been totally undermined. And, we keep talking about the fact that Bangladesh has always had electoral democracy, but that apart, its other democratic institutions always were very, very fragile. There is absolutely no independent institutes there. And this particular government, as I said, through sheer brute power, has been able to constantly overcome any such thing. And every particular institute that we think ought to be seen as independent is not the case here. So, and of course, there is going to be, I mean, US is still, saying some, of course, we know about the sanctions, which has had also against the Rapid Action Battalion forces, which is very responsible for many of the repressive measures that I'm talking about. The media onslaught by the Bangladesh state machinery has been very, very clear. I mean, they have clamped down seriously on every single person who wants to say anything against the government. And, even if the academia and otherwise, everybody's really scared. In fact, now the latest story that's been coming through the new media is about how people have been threatened that they have to go out to cast their vote, even if they're not happy with what is happening. So all in all, I would say it's a very difficult time ahead. We really don't know how it's going to go. There's, of course, the best case scenario for this government is that 7th morning, everybody comes out through fear or otherwise, cast their vote in favor, of course, because it's only the Awami League and its allies here. They've also, I need to add here, about 4 new political parties have been suddenly thrown in the whole electoral field, so that they can probably play the opposition here in this case. They're really new, nobody knows them. They are fielding candidates in 300 seats. I mean, it's laughable to say the least. And so I don't know how that's going to play out. But the other, if of course leaving the best case possible scenario for them, the other scenario, of course, is that we've seen in 96 once when Khalida Zia had forced a one-sided election like this, and Awami League came out on the streets, the people were with her. That was the time, within month of 3 months, there was a repeat election. And that's exactly when the neutral government, or known as the caretaker government, was introduced. So maybe possible that we'll see a similar situation like this. But all in all, doesn't look good. It's a very turbulent times, very heavy use of repressive measures by the government, state machinery. So that's the kind.
Thank you so much, Dr. Datta. That is for the very detailed overview and walking us through the sort of political and timeline and the sort of electoral landscape that has been existing in the country. And you kind of touched upon some key areas which I want to also hear from the India and Pakistan perspective, which is the relationship with the United States, China, and Russia. In South Asia as a region is extremely important in terms of it's a viable economic partner, it's a viable strategic partner for countries all across the globe, for other regions, and particularly the United States, China, and Russia will be watching these elections very closely. And we heard from Dr. Datta with regards to Bangladesh and its involvement with the United States and China, but I'll be curious to hear the India's perspective and also Pakistan's perspective into how these international priorities, each of these countries' international priorities, might impact their domestic policies. And given whatever the election outcomes they might be, will they affect any sort of like the relationships, or will they affect the role of these countries in terms of how they're present at the global stage today? So I'm going to turn over to Dr. Mohan first to hear from you about India and its relationship, particularly with the United States, China, and Russia.
No, I would say there's a deep structural change in the subcontinent unfolding because of the 3 major relations have undergone fundamental changes. One is the India-China conflict, which shows no signs of abatement. After 30 years of nearly relative tranquility, today, India and China are at odds with each other. Then you have US-China conflict, because historically South Asia had coped with Russia-America conflict, but today the China-US conflict is a major one. And finally, the India-US partnership, which is really a new feature in the region. So together, I would say these 3 factors are testing the other countries. I mean, in many ways, how does one adapt to this new dynamic? How do you balance between India and China? How do you balance between US and China? So I think the region is going to go through an interesting phase. And as you rightly said, that look, the region's importance has grown. That India's economic growth has put it in an interesting place. And for all the problems in Bangladesh, it's still, its economy is going to be an interesting factor for other countries. And then the other factor that has come in South Asia is what Nasim talked about, the role of the Gulf. That the Gulf capital today is really become a major force in the transformation of the region, whether it's India's excellent relationships, that's again new with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The scale of those investments that are being talked about is immense. And now Pakistan too is looking to the Gulf to revive its economy. So the role of the Gulf in South Asia, we've normally treated it as a destination for Indian migrant labor. But today, I think the Gulf capital makes it an interesting actor in the region. So I would say, look, in terms of how I look at the US, US talk on democracy. I mean, let me be frank here. In the US can keep talking about democracy in Bangladesh. It's not going to do much about it. That after all, we've seen its record in Pakistan or China. So to think that somehow the US is going to save Bangladesh from itself, I think that's an illusion. Similarly, in Pakistan case too, there's some noise about elections free and fair, but Pakistan is an important geopolitical actor. And they need to deal with the army. So I don't think they're going to fundamentally come in and stand for democracy and political change in any part of Asia. For example, in Saudi Arabia, again, US needs Saudi Arabia. What we saw the US position in 2021 was very different from the US position in 2022. So I would say the US is going to get realistic in dealing with this region, which has become, as you said, an interesting zone of contestation between US, China, and I think that will drive the rest of the politics, I think.
Thank you. And since you mentioned the Gulf states, and Saudi Arabia has been particularly an important financial support for Pakistan. So Ms. Zehra, very briefly, if you could also touch upon this.
I guess in terms of Pakistan, I would say that for Pakistan, it's not a recent phenomena, but for a long time, Pakistan has looked at the whole question of regional connectivity and geoeconomics as an important factor. The only difference is, I mean, if you go back into early 90s, the setting up of ECO, and then there was Nawaz Sharif in the saddle, and he was trying to push for that. At that point, the Pakistan army top generals, the Pakistani establishment did not see the economic crisis coming. It wasn't as bad as it is now. But now, as we speak, I think everybody's on the same page in terms of significance of geoeconomics, and hence we are seeing whether it is Central Asia, whether it is Pakistan, Iran, Pakistan, China. It's now, CPEC onwards has been now relatively an old story. And what we are now seeing is that the Gulf states, with whom Pakistan has enjoyed decades-long relationship, but mostly in the area of security and in terms of migrant labor, now you have a very significant initiative being taken. Both Pakistan and the GCC countries, they have basically looked at it. They're looking at this situation they're from the same lens, and whether, as I mentioned, whether it is the area of mining or whether it is IT or whether it is food security and so on and so forth. So you have major initiatives. There's been a lot of activity that has been going on, and I think it's currently a work in progress with UAE. UAE has been involved in Pakistan in the maritime field, and it is expanding its involvement at this point. And again, I go back to SIFC, which is a structure that's been put into place and which is likely to stay no matter who comes in. And these initiatives that are right now in the works are initiatives that are going to continue irrespective of who comes to power. At the same time, talking of economic security, etc., and looking at economic recovery. Privatization initiative in privatization is very important. State-owned enterprise, the way they've been bleeding. This has now been, it's a hands-on thing, and it seems like in the next couple of months we'll see some major initiatives, some major sales in that area. So I think all in all, Pakistan and the Gulf states, they have an important relationship going, and Pakistan is looking at all of this in terms of geostrategy, economics. The US, you were talking of the United States. Pakistan US are kind of tugging along. There's nothing sensational in this relationship. There's no crisis in this relationship. It's a relationship which is, moving on at a slow pace. But Pakistan's main focus is really in the countries around it.
Thank you so much. And I do want to come to the questions we received from our audience here. So the first question is with regards to the neighborhood policies that we kind of touched upon. So I don't want to go into that. India's role, Dr. Mohan, I'm going to come to you with that really quick. How is India's role kind of is evolving within the sub-region, especially if you're looking at the geopolitics changing in Maldives and in Bhutan? So with those countries, in terms of neighborhood policies, how do you look at that? And I also will be curious to hear each of your thoughts very quickly on, in general, in terms of, whether pre-elections or post-elections, we'll see any form of regional integration or any sort of regional cooperation, at least on some of the global issues, including climate change, and because South Asia's had troubles doing that. So I'm going to come to you, Dr. Mohan, quickly, and then
basically three quick points. I mean, I don't think we are ever getting closer to a regional integration in the full South Asian sense, because Pakistan is still not ready to do trade and other issues with India because it has certain demands. I'm not criticizing that position. I'm just saying the fact. So forget about South Asia as a collective integrating with itself. That's a bad news. But the good news is India-Bangladesh relations have seen a significant expansion, and we're going to see in the eastern subcontinent, India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, you're seeing a lot more integration that is taking place. And similarly, in the case of Sri Lanka, which had serious economic problems, India played a major role along with the IMF and the international community to support it, coming out of this crisis. So I think what is happening today is not the SAARC-led regional integration, but I think India's economic size and capabilities give it a chance to engage with the smaller neighbors and to be able to construct something for mutual benefit. That's what we've seen. And I think in this effort, because of the larger geopolitics, US, Japan, and others are also willing to work with India in promoting some kind of cross-border engagements in the region.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Datta, what will be your thoughts on changing neighborhood policies of Bangladesh? Bangladesh and India, you pointed out, have had a sort of rebuilding of their ties, especially in the past few years.
Yes, India-Bangladesh stands at the best relationship they've ever had, the kind of partnership that's happened. But as I said, both of them together are giving way to a sub-region in the South Asian context. One is, of course, to the motor vehicle agreement, which has run into problem, but the kind of cross-border facilities that India has been able to build with Bangladesh, with Bhutan, with Nepal, they're going to, kind of fall in together. But the other interesting aspect is the energy trade that's happened. Bangladesh, India, of course, very positive energy trade. India, Bhutan, very good positive energy trade. And India, Nepal, again, in the last couple of years, we've been able to establish a very positive partnership on that. Now, what is happening is that it's all kind of coming together. So Bangladesh is going to be buying, energy from Nepal through a grid which India will be supporting, because it obviously geographically it has to go through India. Similarly, there are more options opening up with Bhutan. So that's something, in that term, I guess there is something very positive development. Also, if of course, right now, it's not a good time to discuss Myanmar given the local conditions there, but India is also building this trilateral highway, which is through India's northeast, Myanmar to Thailand, and then onward to Cambodia and others. Bangladesh has also said that they want to join that. So basically, India or India's Northeast is going to be a kind of bridge between South Asia and Southeast Asia. So these are the kind of sub-regional initiatives that all the countries together, the like-minded countries together, are working on. And it does take time. The hard infrastructure, the soft infrastructure, often in the region don't work together. But again, there has been a huge progress, I must say, in the last decade, which we hadn't seen earlier. There was always a talk shop, but now there has been a very positive development. And again, which is something that we constantly talk about, that stability is important to take these initiatives forward. But again, whether this election, this very one-sided, non-credible election will bring stability to Bangladesh or not is a question that we all need to figure along the way. I don't think that, I think the jury is still out on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. On that question on Maldives and Bhutan came to us from Rishi Gupta. We have another question, which is also in terms of how South Asia is dealing and these individual countries are dealing with their neighborhood, and that's from Maria with regards to the Afghan migrant deportation issue. Misera that's happening in Pakistan right now. Do you think the situation and the kind of, especially with regard to security, but also refugees, is going to play into the elections?
I don't see the refugee issue becoming a particularly key issue in the elections. I do think, however, the refugee issue has become a key issue in terms of, the debate within Pakistan and the differences of opinion, even within the political class. I think while different political parties and individuals and think tanks, civil society do feel that calling for the return of Afghan refugees, especially those who don't have legal papers, etc., is completely, Pakistan is within its right to do that, but how to do it and in what methodology to follow and what time to pick up to initiate something like this, I think that's a big question. And that's a question that Farwa is being discussed and debated even now. I mean, it's a question that has gone to the Supreme Court of Pakistan. So it's not a question that is linked to politics. It is a question for Pakistanis who have hosted Afghans for decades. I think it is truly a global example in terms of how one country with its own limited resources has welcomed and hosted another people, whatever deep historical traditional ties there may be, but this has had a cost. Pakistan has incurred a cost, but none of this gives the license to anyone in Pakistan to basically go for repatriation in anything but a humane and systematic manner. And I think that's the positive about it. And as I said, it's in the Supreme Court of Pakistan, the question. And I think everybody is reviewing that aspect, but not to say that asking for the refugees to return is necessarily a negative thing.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And we have another question since Dr. Datta brought up Nepal. There are two questions. I'm just going to combine both of them. Is with regards to how Nepal is, one is its trade with Bangladesh, energy trade with Bangladesh, and what role could India play in terms of either facilitating it or obstructing it. The other is Nepal's relationship with China, and how could it balance to have better relationships with India as well. So Dr. Mohan, if you could reflect on that, and then I'll go to Dr. Datta for her quick reflection as well.
I'll just talk about the China thing. I think Sreeradha can talk about what's happening on the ground level. I would say, look, I think the question of China's role in South Asia, and many Indians have deep anxieties, but the fact is China is the second largest economy in the world, and we are neighbors to them. So there's no way of keeping them out. So I would say the role of China in the region will only grow. The challenge for India, therefore, is not to obstruct, but to offer attractive alternatives in terms of what it can do with the neighbors. We've seen some of that effort, but my sense is that India has to come to terms with the reality of a strong economy next door, and that in turn needs a reorientation of India's own regional economic policies. And we've seen one good thing that has come out of the Chinese pressure has been, how India now deals with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal has changed significantly. So I think we are seeing some positive signs, because in the end, in India that shares 4,000 kilometers of border with Bangladesh, so the problem is with us if we can't trade with them more than China does with them. My sense is there is a recognition of that we need to have our borders, at least in the eastern subcontinent, more open, more possible for there being open economic frontiers rather than security frontiers. Some progress, but a long way to go.
Thank you. And Dr. Datta, over to you. You're muted.
Nepal and Bangladesh, of course, have been in conversation, and clearly they agreed. And at that point, of course, India had to be brought in. And India, I think, is very, very positive about this because it also, there is an advantage to that. And right now, I think, as I said, there's a technical issue in place because a grid needs to be ineffectively built because and how, the transfer of electricity will take place. So there's a thing that India would buy it, and India would then from Nepal and then sell it to Bangladesh instead of that particular electricity moving. That's not the way it works. But again, I think the conversation is on, and they're discussing charges and overhead, whatever those kind of technical issues in place alongside the monetary aspects. So it's very much there. It's going to happen on the it's going to happen. And in terms of the I think Raj, of course, talked about China a bit, and China is working very closely with Nepal and Bangladesh, and that's something we just have to, deal with. And there has been some issues where India has very prominently expressed its annoyance or concerns about some of the projects. Some of the neighbors have not undertaken those projects, some have. So, it's a kind of a case-to-case kind of a thing. But again, that's something that we just have to continue to deal with. It's not something that we can ignore or can be in denial about.
Well, thank you so much. South Asia has the potential to leverage, what each of these countries have to offer. But it's good to see that energy and the economic sort of opportunities are a driver for at least some of these bilateral ties and trilateral ties to emerge. But I do long to see for a day when all of these South Asian countries could just cooperate, especially on challenges like climate change and other shared challenges that are impacting the region's population in similar ways. We have plenty more questions from our audience, but I do want to go to, take the conversation to a global scale and have your thoughts on how the global crises that are shaping up in Ukraine and in the Middle East more recently, how are they, if they were to impact at all these elections, and just how the political priorities and policy priorities in each of these countries might shape up in the foreseeable future. But also there's a lot of public sentiment attached to these issues. So if they are going to impact the voter sentiment as well in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. So if I could go to Ms. Zehra and then to Dr. Mohan and then eventually Dr. Datta.
Well, in terms of the global crisis, I guess two are important, one less so for Pakistan and the other more. I think in terms of Ukraine, its relevance had to do with Pakistan's engaging Russia and Pakistan, engaging Russia for energy needs, etc. And that's pretty much a settled issue. I don't think that's something that spills over into the public realm so much. The whole question of was Pakistan going to be, retrace its steps? Was it going to be pushed back in engaging with Russia because of the pressure that was clearly coming from the United States? For example, it's now an established fact, without doubt, that when the former Prime Minister Imran Khan was going to travel to Moscow, that is before the war had broken out, before Russia had invaded the Ukraine, the National Security Advisor, US National Security Advisor, had called Pakistan's National Security Advisor to suggest that the trip be called off, and it wasn't called off. And after Imran Khan's removal, the question was Pakistan just going to back off? But Pakistan didn't, and so we bought oil, we bought wheat, etc. So our relations with Russia continue. So to that extent, that's business that's been taken care of already. As far as the Middle East is concerned, very clearly Pakistan's own legacy, Pakistan's current position. And, I was just listening to this conversation about US being interested and concerned about Bangladesh. For God's sakes, it's participating actively in a genocide of the Palestinians on the West Bank. And only of late, we are hearing the US Secretary of State and the US President and the US Secretary of Defense mildly reprimanding Israel for the butchering that is continuing in West Bank still continues. So, I mean, what to talk of any human rights concerns in Bangladesh? Certainly, the entire edifice, if there was any moral kind of edifice that the West had and many of these countries on the question of human rights, etc., is just fallen apart. This is a question very clearly that is important in the Pakistani mind, is important for the Pakistani voter. No recognition of Israel will continue to be a policy that the people of Pakistan will push for. And, we've had in Pakistan several kind of trying to go near that issue, trial ballooning, questioning of, talking of the advantages of engaging Israel and recognizing. I think it's a big no-no, and it will continue to be a big no-no. To that extent, I think I don't see that really, Farwa, as something where the political parties have a different view. So it's only when you have really different views that it becomes a question of contest and argument, etc. It's something that, as far as Pakistanis are concerned, there's a question of why aren't we more proactive within the UN? Why are we not raising that at different summits? But I don't see that really becoming an important issue in the elections.
Right. Thank you. And over to you, Dr. Mohan.
No, I would agree with that. I don't think the foreign policy issues will have a major effect. In terms of actual policy management, the two crises have been real. I think on the Ukraine question and before that, the COVID. One way or another, the region has managed to come through those, and I don't see in fact Israel's loss. I would thought at one point just before the October 7 attacks, it looked like there was speculation that a few more countries in South Asia will recognize Israel. I mean, so I think it's a pity that that transformation has not taken place given the crisis in Gaza. So I would say, as far as India is concerned, I mean, I think Mr. Modi is going to, make the maximum out of the fact that India is doing well, and India is a leader, and the G20 imagery that has seen. So unless some other crisis comes up, as because we are still 2-3 months away, so I don't see a major external question impinging onto the Indian elections.
Thank you very much. And what about Bangladesh, Dr. Datta?
Certainly for Bangladesh, on the Ukraine, we've seen Bangladesh largely be with Russia, really, except one or two occasions when they voted against. But and the fact that Russia has also given some positive noises about the election which Awami League is managing, so obviously tells you that. But in terms of this particular Israel issue, of course, there is this huge constituency that Awami League has, 30-35 whatever percentage, which is obviously anti-US because of the sanction issue. They've been saying that not only are the RAP sanction, but even any particular officer or individual who seem to be part of this rather unfair and one-sided election, they're going to be sanctioned with visa issues. So that's something obviously has angered them, and that the fallout of that. And this particular, huge attacks, of course, has its own ramifications. But there is also a substantial group on the ground who say that US is the only one who can actually bring in some changes which is required on the ground. And they are the only ones who can, through some threat, fear, economic sanctions, which would really hurt Bangladesh. So that's the only way for them to get on track. Otherwise, Bangladesh is really going towards a very, very rigid, almost autocratic kind of, government. So in that sense, there is, I think, a house divided. But again, largely we've seen in Bangladesh, it has had some very anti-US positions, really. But at this point of time, there are also some strong pro-US positions because of the that's non-democratic practices of this particular government. That's
and Dr. Datta, we have a question with regards to from Shazia Rafi and whether international observers such as the EU or NDI will be observing these elections, or their local observer groups will be also observing these elections. Is that a thing? Do you think there'll
so
be
just a few days ago, the foreign secretary had called about 90 head of the missions for a meeting, to talk about the elections and to seek their support. But the official position, as we know, not only the US and along with them, I think about 7 other countries, which also included Japan, who's a very close partner with Bangladesh, and Korea. Who also signed that statement saying that not only were they not going to send observers, they were very unhappy with the way it was unfolding. We've also seen about 5 different EU countries send in their MPs with a note which tells them that they're, of course, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen one kind of a bipartisan team that's come from the US to observe the ground situation, and 2 EU delegations also. But again, I'm sure there'll be enough people there, enough foreign observers to kind of support and be part of the international observer team, really.
Thank you very much. And we have a minute to go, but I want to quickly address this question, come to Ms. Zehra. We have a question from Prashant Singh, and he is asking whether the current support to the PMLN party by the military is also driven by their calculation to open talks with India post-election.
No, I'm afraid no. That's certainly not a consideration. The considerations are various. But as far as opening talks with India is concerned, I think that all the political parties are clear, as is the establishment, that talks will be opened once there is some opening from India. So there has to be reciprocity there. Pakistan can't initiate just talks with India. And no, I'm a little amused at this question that opening talks is so important for the Pakistan Armed Forces that they will actually, in the face of so much criticism, support PMLN. No, the considerations are different.
Right. Well, thank you so much. This has been a thoroughly engaging and insightful conversation. There's a lot for us to further continue talking about, and we can go on, but we have time limitations, of course. But I really appreciate all of our panelists' time for joining us, and for all our participants and our audience for making this conversation all the more engaging with their questions. So thank you once again, and everyone, please stay in touch with the Asia Society Policy Institute. Follow us on our social media channels, subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss out all the interesting events and all the written outputs that we keep on producing. We work very hard on and continue to do so in the year ahead and more. So thank you, and good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everyone wherever they are in the world.
Thank you, Farwa. Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.